Hey there, Robert John Hadfield here again from Audiomover, about to talk about some classic vinyl. Now the one I've got here today is a little bit obscure, but people who know will know about this. And there's a really important person on this record that many people will recognize who this is too. And this is, I remember when this album came out because it was just so cool, and there was so much buzz around this album at the time. And what's funny about it is the buzz was because of some of the members, I think, and at the time I didn't even know who these people were. So this came out in '83, so I was in that 13, 14 range, and I was just kind of, even though I was kind of a little metalhead kid, I was just kind of figuring out who was who and what was what. So who was on this album went right past me. So the name Fastway actually was a combination of two of the founders of this group. So the two people that originally put this group together was a guy named Fast Eddie Clarke, and if you've heard of him before, he's one of the people that you would have heard of. He was the guitarist for Motorhead in kind of the classic Motorhead lineup. And the other person was a guy named Pete Way. Now Pete Way was the bass player for UFO. And so these two guys were going to make this band called Fastway. And they picked up a really unknown singer, never really been in anything before, named Dave King. And anyway, so when they went to record this album, believe it or not, Pete Way actually left the band before they recorded this album. And so one of the things that confused me as a kid, you know, when you would read liner notes and you'd take an album home and you'd start studying who's who and who does what. Well, I didn't know who Fast Eddie Clarke was. Dave King, of course, was brand new. And the thing that really threw me, though, was there was no bassist listed anywhere on the album. I mean, I've never found anywhere on this record where there's any credit given to anybody playing the bass guitar. So as a dumb kid, I'm immediately thinking, was there no bass on this album? Every band has a bass player, right? Well, if you listen to the music, of course, there's a bass on it. And it just didn't make sense to me. But what happened was Pete Way left the band, and the studio they recorded in, there was a guy working there that played the bass, and he played the bass. And I don't even know what the guy's name was. It was some name that I wouldn't be able to pronounce anyway, but it was just somebody, and still no credit on this album at all for who the bass player was. Now, the other thing that was interesting about this album, at least for a lot of people that were kind of paying attention at the time, the year before, there was a movie that came out in 1982 called Fast Times at Ridgemont High. And one of the things that became popular from that movie was Vans shoes, and specifically the black and white checkered shoes. And so I always wondered if they were playing off of that, because Fast Times, as I remember the movie, actually Fast Times at Ridgemont High, Fast Times was written in red, and of course those black and white checkered Vans became really, really popular. And because I think Spicoli, I don't remember if I saw the movie, but I think Spicoli actually wore those things in the movie. All I know is that after that movie came out, everybody had to have black and white checkered Vans. And here we were, you know, a year later, and then this album comes out from a band called Fastway, and it has the black and white checker, Fastway written in red. I don't know. I don't know that they were doing that, you know, from a marketing standpoint, but it kind of seemed a little too coincidental. Now, of course, when you look at their other albums, you know, it's kind of car themed. And so, you know, the black and white checkered flag, I think, is what we were trying to get across here. But it was just a little kind of an interesting connection there. So Fastway, let's flip this over and look at the back. So the band members here, of course, there's Fast Eddie Clarke. And like I said, he's from the classic Motorhead lineup. And that's where he comes from. Once again, when I was a kid, I had no idea who this was. I didn't know anything about Motorhead. But anyway, he's a really, really important guitarist as far as hard rock and heavy metal goes, because he had made a lot of that classic Motorhead music. Here's David King, vocals and harmonica. He was credited, people really loved him because he had a very Led Zeppelin, Robert Plant kind of sound. So many people back then were being compared to Robert Plant. You know, see how high you can sing. And anyway, he really did have this Robert Plant sense to him, kind of a blues thing that he could do. And he was a huge voice. And anyway, he was actually really amazing. This redhead kid, and he came in and he was just amazing. And so Dave King, and then Jerry Shirley. Also had no idea who he was at the time. But what's interesting about Jerry Shirley is Jerry Shirley was the drummer for a band called Humble Pie. And Humble Pie had been around for a long, long time. and when I was that age, I was only familiar with one Humble Pie song. And it actually, the version I was familiar with wasn't even Humble Pie playing it. This is going to be way in the obscure references here. But there was a band called Kick Axe. Yes, there was a band called Kick Axe. And I liked them a lot. But there was a band called Kick Axe, and they did a cover of a song called 30 Days in the Hole, which was originally a Humble Pie song, and Jerry Shirley played on it. And I loved that song. I loved the Kick Axe version. I found out, oh, this is a band called Humble Pie. And anyway, Jerry Shirley was his kind of claim to fame before being in here. He was in Humble Pie. And like I said, Pete Way, nowhere to be seen because he didn't appear on this album, even though that was partly where who the band was named after. So then they have the song list here, and I'll be honest with you, there's only 3 songs on this album that I am familiar with. I don't know that I played this album a lot, but the 3 songs I loved. And the one of them was this very first song called Easy Livin'. And it was just this really, really super simple song. Really simple. And it had pretty cool lyrics. Raising like the Mary from below the sea, she's got easy living. I'm trying to get up in that Dave King register. Anyway, but it had kind of if you're a musician, you understand kind of the 50s, the 1-4-5 kind of riff. As I recall, it followed that pattern. And it was just really straight ahead, simple rock and roll, and that's all there was to it. The other one, so the other one that you may have heard is this song on side 2, number 3, called Say What You Will. And what made it kind of popular was it had this really cool guitar riff. And then, say what you will, you will. Anyway, that was a song. And it actually got some airplay. Both those tunes got airplay. They got not wildly famous, but they did okay. And then the other one, there was kind of a sleeper on this album that they re-released this on another album later. I think they put this on the Trick or Treat soundtrack, if I'm not mistaken, but it's this song called Heft. And Heft is this really plodding, and I don't want to compare it to, I guess I'll kind of have to. It's a little bit of that plodding Led Zeppelin sound. And anyway, it's a song called Heft. I barely remember how it goes now that I'm sitting here. I just remember that I kind of made that connection when I was younger, that it had that feel to it. And it was just, anyway, it was really cool. So that was that's the song list here. Now, the other thing to notice is who produced this. This was produced by a guy named Eddie Kramer. Now, if you've heard that name before and you're into rock music, there's a reason you've heard it, because he has been kind of all over the place with a lot of different groups. He worked with Jimi Hendrix early on. He was I believe he was the sound engineer on Houses of the Holy. And I think he even did Coda as well. So he was kind of involved with Led Zeppelin. He had some other credits. I have a love-hate relationship with Eddie Kramer, because he actually produced some Kiss albums. I think he produced Love Gun, Rock and Roll Over, which are 2 of my, if you're into Kiss, I know people, as soon as I say Kiss, will just turn this off. It's amazing how much passion the word Kiss brings with certain people that either hate or love them. I'm a big Kiss fan. But he produced a couple of some of my favorite Kiss stuff. Rock and Roll Over is one of my favorite Kiss albums, and he produced that one. So he had some really great credits to his name, but then I'm going to pull out a couple of other really obscure references so the people that are into this stuff will be able to grab onto this. He produced an Alcatraz album, the one that had Steve Vai, and I can't remember what that one was called, but it was the Steve Vai, the Alcatraz album that had Steve Vai on it. I saw them on that tour. Graham Bonnet was the singer. I didn't like the record. I didn't think it was that good. He also produced, and that wasn't his fault, I guess. The songwriting I didn't think was that great anyway. But then he also produced an album that was kind of a disappointment to me. And it was, another obscure reference, was a band called Icon. And Icon had this solo album, or sorry, their debut album was just called Icon. And I'll bring it out sometime and do a little video about it. It was one of my favorite heavy metal albums from the 80s. I loved that album. I played it so much. It was a little bit muddy. The production wasn't really good, but man, the music was cool. And then they had their follow-up album called, I think the follow-up album was Night of the Crime. And I believe that's the one. If I get this wrong, you'll have to, somebody will correct me, but it just totally changed Icon's sound. And they just lost me at that point. It was okay, but it wasn't as great as their first album, and Eddie Kramer produced it. So Eddie Kramer, for me, once again, just kind of all over, but he produced this album, and this was awesome. I mean, he did a great job. The songs that I loved on this album, he did an amazing job with. So let's bust out the, excuse me, got a little bit of a head cold right now. Let's just take a look at the inside. This was just kind of, nothing too special on the inside here. Just had all the lyrics to the songs, and then once again some credits down here. But once again, dig through this. You won't find any reference to a bass player anywhere on here. So once again, totally uncredited. Then you flip it over, and you've got another kind of cool picture of the band right here. And here's the guys, the three of them, once again, that confused the heck out of me when I was younger. And then the lyrics to, here's Easy Living, the song, the one I was singing a minute ago. Raising like the Mary from below the sea, she's got easy living. Dancing in the evening till 2:45. Anyway, I loved this tune. I actually played this with a couple of bands when I was younger because we loved the song so much. And then here's Heft. My said the beggar man, what you give and what you take are two different things. And it's worth, if you like hard rock, heavy metal, especially from this era, it's worth going and finding this tune and listening to it. I think it's a really good tune. Oh, you know what? I remember All I Need Is Your Love. All I need is your love. Okay, I think that's how that one went, and that was a pretty cool tune too. I think if I went back through and were to play this, I'd recognize and be able to sing along. But anyway, they were some pretty cool songs. And it was a typical Columbia Records, inside label, so there wasn't much to that. So, but it was a really cool band, and like I said, I was totally clueless about UFO. I was clueless about Motorhead. I didn't know anything about them until later, and grew to really love both of those bands. And so, but that's where it came from. This was Fast Eddie Clarke and Pete Way, and this was their group. Came out in 1983, and there's some really cool tunes on this thing, and it's worth listening to. And if you like these videos that we make here at Audiomover, please like and subscribe. And what we do here in the Audiomover studio is we take old audio and videotapes and convert them into digital. We've been doing it for a couple decades. So if you have old audio and videotapes and you need to convert them to digital, or if you know somebody that does, because I'm sure you do, let them know about us and send them to audiomover.com, audiomover.com, where they can get an order started. Anyway, with that, have a fantastic day.